At the start, I was generally cutting out fat. That was sort of priority one. But then, as things got worse, carbohydrate and calories and everything almost. I think on a good sort of food day for me, I was eating maybe a bit of an apple and very, very little, in fact. Another confused sort of part of my problem was that I had to play sport because I love sport. However, playing sport was ruining me further. I mean, it was sort of the downfall, if you like, because if you don't eat and you play lots of sport, you burn off lots of calories and you lose too much weight.
You say you wanted to get fit for the rugby season. Would you say that's what triggered your sort of decline into anorexia?
I think it's very difficult to sort of pinpoint one specific factor that led to anorexia, but I can say in combination that sport and getting fit for the rugby season was definitely one. However, there were other things, i.e. offhand comments, and just generally being quite naive to the whole situation of healthy eating. And one thing I have to add is these pro-anorexia sites on the internet, and the internet was a huge database, and it's unhindered, it's uncensored, and you can really delve into whatever you so wish, and that is generally quite a bad thing.
And were you doing that? Were you getting sort of tips, if you like,
yes,
from the internet?
I was, and I can remember one in particular time I was in a classroom doing IT, and I was surfing the internet and I was looking at these websites, and I just burst out crying in the middle of the class, and people didn't really know what to do. What do? You see someone crying, but the diagnosis is very vague, especially in boys. It's not something that someone would presume is the case. It's generally something else. I mean, I was tested for cancer, AIDS and gluten allergies and all various things like that, which really I knew deep down were completely irrelevant. However, in the hope of pleasing my family, which was struggling at the time.
So when you first went to the GP, they didn't ask you what you were eating, whether you were worried about food?
It was a long time ago. My memories are going to be quite vague in sort of specifics, but it wasn't really centred around anorexia. I think it was something we had to push for ourselves. My mum was determined to get me better, or make me well again. You can admit you have the problem, but deep down, like I was describing the two voices in your head of anorexia and your healthy voice. Your healthy voice is laying quite dormant in the back of your head, and then you have anorexia right at the forefront, dictating everything you do. Everything that your healthy mind says is right. You can eat this, it's not going to make you fat at all. In fact, it's completely healthy, it's what normal people do. Anorexia would jump in straight off and, no, what are you doing? This is terrible.
And how did you manage to hide from your mum and from your friends that you weren't eating properly? Because surely they'd have seen you weren't putting food in your mouth.
Sure. Eating, I could eat. If I was in front of my mum, I'd have to eat. It'd be very difficult and sort of tormenting, and that would usually mean that I'd go upstairs and do sit-ups and press-ups, endless, until I'd feel sick. However, I'd never be sick. That's not something that I contemplated once. But when I was at school, this is what sort of let my anorexia run wild. No supervision for food. I'd go in with a packed lunch because I was scared of eating with people. Because I knew eating with people meant that they'd be watching what I was eating, and that doesn't play well in your mind. You're very fragile at that point. So I used to throw my packed lunch straight off, in the bin. But very deceptively, it's very dark. I mean, I was sort of scraping out yogurt pots and making it look as though I'd eaten them, but then put them back in. And you do deceive an awful lot of people when you do that, and that's where the guilt comes from.
At what stage did you admit that you had a problem?
I think when I went to the clinic, which is around in between February and May, and that was
nearly a year after.
Yeah, well, near enough, yes. Yeah. And I went there to please my parents. I still had in the back of my mind the idea that I could come out on the other end and I'd be completely unscathed and I'd progress like I had been a year previously. But this is where the clinic sort of comes into play, and they do their job very well. I have no qualms with what they've done and what they keep on doing. They shock you. You're in a room, you have an initial assessment, and psychiatrists, nutritionists, consultants, all counsellors, and they come back to you with your parents in the room at the same time, and they tell you the situation.
So how severe was the situation at this stage?
Well, it's fair to say it was quite severe. They explained that if I continued the way I was, you have no more really than just under a month to sort of survive. And that, when you're 13, obviously you just don't. This is where you're naive. You don't understand. You can never believe that you might, die, I suppose. And that comes as a huge shock. And And it does mean that you want to do something about it, but you still can't comprehend why you're going to die, because you're so convinced that what you're doing is completely right and it's not abnormal. I mean, you walk along the streets and you see people that you think are thinner, and you want to compete with them. You want to be thinner than them because they make you feel fat. You're driven by sort of an evil, sort of deceiving, affliction that's not good. It's really wrong.
This might sound like an obvious question, but weren't you just so hungry a lot of the time? You say at some points you were just eating half an apple a day. It must have hurt. Your stomach must have been painful.
Yeah, no, that's something I don't forget very often. The pain, it was excruciating, and the fact that when you go to bed and you've got no blood sugar or you've got no energy and you can't sleep and you're up all night and all you do constantly, I used to do this for night after night, I'd plan out meals, imaginary meals, fancy meals that I would love to eat for a week, maybe 2, every day, morning, night, evening, everything, and I'd never eat them, but I'd plan it out in my head. And this is when I came to the point where I'd squeeze something and I'd smell it, and I couldn't eat it, of course, but I would smell it and it'd be as close as I could. And that was difficult because it hurts. It does hurt. At that point, you look terrible, very gaunt and ill. And until years ago, I didn't really realise how kind of ill I looked. And this is where I get quite guilty and embarrassed, is that my mum and my mates walked around with me when I looked like that. And I know it's no concern really, but it kind of makes me feel a bit bad, and they must have felt, they've been put in quite an awkward situation.
Because everyone else would have seen as a problem.
Yeah.
You said you stood in front of the mirror with your mum. She was trying to tell you weren't fat, but you were pinching fat that wasn't there. How much did you weigh at that stage?
Well, in between, I would say, I can't put an exact figure on it, but 6.5 and lower.
6.5 stone or less?
Or a bit less, yeah. And I was quite a tall boy, I wasn't short. It was skin, there was no fat there. My fat percentage was dangerously low, and I was already eating into muscle and organs.
And how did it affect your family life? It must have been quite difficult for everyone.
It was fractious, it wasn't nice, it was difficult, lots of crying, lots of tension, and lots of misunderstandings, I suppose, that it's completely understandable that that's what happens. It's very difficult for anyone to understand what is going on in someone's mind when they're so corrupt. We gelled together stronger at the end. It was quite fractious, like I said, at the start and throughout, but then towards the end, when there was light at the end of the tunnel, we started to bond very well. And until now, I mean, my mum and my dad, I'm very close to them, because you have to appreciate what they've done. And my brother as well. I mean, at the time, I think he was only 7, perhaps younger. And he now doesn't have much of an understanding. He refers to it as my sort of period of illness.
And how long did it take you to fully recover? Would you say you're fully recovered now?
I would say I am now. However, there is always the chance of a relapse, and you're always warned about this. However, you learn, it never leaves you. It's always constant in your mind. The thought of food is obviously it's not as bad as it was when you're anorexic, but there are still elements of it. And in that case, you just learn to deal with it. You've been taught various sort of systems and protocols through psychiatry and counselling. And the counsellors and everyone else that helped me that way were absolutely fantastic. I mean, they really set you on the right path. Because like I said, the physical element is the first part, and the most serious and severe is the mental problem.
Yeah. And how long did it take to recover mentally?
I think, say, 2 years ago, I felt quite secure. I was fortunate in the fact that I had lots of people backing me and supporting me, and these people were the ones that pushed me through, because I did need pushing through. If I couldn't do it myself, there's absolutely no way. I wouldn't be here if I had to do this myself. However, there are people out there that have had this illness for years and years and years. I was very fortunate in the fact that I had it, got over it relatively quickly, and it's not with me anymore. There are people that have it and it's dragged on for the rest of their lives, and those people are the ones that need help, and they need people to sort of get behind them. It's very easy to be apathetic towards people like that, to think they'll do it if they want. It'll get to the stage where it's so bad that they need to do it. But unfortunately, it'll get to the stage where it's so bad that they can't. They won't be here.
If you or someone you know struggles with an eating disorder and you'd like to talk to someone who can tell you about organisations that can offer further information and support, you can call the BBC Action Line 0800 110 100.
Or text advice to 63399.